Do you feel um, like the world has been changing recently?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely feels like it has.
Right. And I want you to really think about that for a second,
Yeah.
because I don't just mean the obvious, you know, the loud headlines that hit our feeds every morning.
Scared of the big news cycles.
Exactly. I mean this incredibly subtle, uh, this lingering feeling that the very texture of your daily reality is fundamentally different than it used to be.
Yeah. The baseline stuff.
Right, like the unspoken rules of how we interact with strangers or the baseline expectations we have for our careers, even the institutions we just implicitly trust. I mean, it all feels like it's shifting beneath our feet.
It does, but not always in a way we can clearly notice, right?
Yeah.
Like in the present moment.
Perhaps not in a way you can clearly put your finger on. You look around on a random Tuesday, and everything seems, well, perfectly normal. You're drinking the exact same coffee, driving the same commute. But then you look back at a photograph or you read a text message thread from, like, just 5 years ago, and you get this sudden, jarring realization that you are practically living on an entirely different planet.
Yeah. We are somehow totally immersed in this current of transition, yet our conscious minds remain completely blind to the actual mechanics of what is happening while it's actually happening.
Sometimes we only realize it when we look back. And that brings us to the mission of this deep dive. Today, we are exploring a really fascinating stack of philosophical texts that try to explain this exact phenomenon.
It's a really incredible body of work.
It is. Specifically, we're looking at a framework known as the Reflective Humanism core fields and a conceptual theory called N73.
Right.
Our goal today is to understand the actual functional mechanics of why we are practically blind to a changing reality.
How the brain actually hides it from us.
Right, how your brain processes the present minute by minute, and why we only ever realize the world has shifted when we are looking at it in the rearview mirror. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
If you and I, and everyone listening, if we all share this lingering feeling that the world is shifting, what exactly are we failing to observe in the present moment? Like, why the blind spot?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the N73 framework proposes a radical shift in how we usually think about human perception. We tend to operate on a pretty simple assumption, right?
Which is,
That if something changes in our environment and we don't see it, it's just because, we weren't paying enough attention.
we were distracted.
Exactly. We assume the change was simply unseen. But N73 argues something much more profound. It suggests that reality is constantly updating. Like our institutions, our social norms, our deepest personal relationships, they're quietly shifting at every moment.
Okay,
But this change isn't just unseen by accident, it actively becomes invisible.
wait, invisible?
Yes, the human mind is mechanically designed to render that change invisible to you.
So change seems to be happening but not being perceived. So you're saying it's not just a lack of focus, it's more like we have a deliberate blind spot built directly into our cognitive lenses.
Exactly. Maybe it's not unseen. Maybe it becomes invisible because of how we are forced to process time and difference. And the reflective humanism texts, they explain this mechanism through a concept called generation gradients.
Generation gradients, okay.
Right. They break generation, which we can just think of as the process of reality updating itself. They break it into two distinct types based on the gradient or the slope of the change.
Okay, what's the first type?
The first type is called discontinuous generation. The text also refers to this as a collision.
A collision. That sounds, well, violent?
It is.
Walk me through what a cognitive collision actually looks like in everyday life.
So it is violent, at least in a psychological sense. A collision happens when the phase difference between your internal understanding of the world and the actual external reality becomes too steep.
Oh, I see.
Think of it like a massive sudden divergence. Imagine you've worked at a company for 20 years and you have a deeply ingrained mental model of how your industry works.
Right, you know the ropes.
Exactly. Then, overnight, a new technology completely obliterates your field. The world just took 10 massive steps forward, but your internal model hasn't moved an inch.
Oh, wow.
That impossibly steep gradient causes a collision. It forces a sudden, unavoidable update in your reality. But we experience it as a severe rupture in time.
A rupture.
Yeah, the texts describe this as causing heat or pain. It's an abrupt, jarring confrontation with a reality that simply no longer matches the map in your head.
Okay, yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, we've all felt that heat before, right? Like culture shock or a sudden breakup or a global event that just stops everything.
Exactly.
So if the first type is a collision, a massive rupture, What is the alternative? Like, how does the brain prefer to handle a changing world?
The preferred alternative is the second type, which is continuous generation, or what the text calls questioning.
Questioning.
Right. Instead of letting the difference between your mind and the external world build up until it snaps into a collision, this mode keeps what they call the interference field open. The gradient of change is gentle. Updates to your reality happen continuously, in tiny, almost imperceptible micro increments.
So you don't even notice.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Because that phase difference is never allowed to become steep, this continuous generation drastically minimizes the pain of change. It's a quiet, ongoing, background synchronization with the world.
I think I get this. Let me try an analogy.
Go for it.
So is continuous generation sort of like a background software update on your phone that you never even notice? You just wake up, maybe your weather app looks a tiny bit different, but the phone kept working the whole time.
Right.
While a collision is like your computer completely crashing, the screen goes blue, and it forces a painful 20-minute reboot while you're right in the middle of an important presentation.
That analogy gets us really close to the functional reality. I mean, I'd argue human cognition is much messier than a clean software update, but yeah, the core mechanism is basically the same. The continuous update keeps your mental system running without interrupting your subjective experience of the day. The collision, on the other hand, drops a roadblock, stops everything, and forces you to painfully acknowledge that the system you rely on has fundamentally changed.
Which makes total sense from a basic survival standpoint, honestly. Nobody wants the psychological blue screen of death while they're trying to, like, buy groceries or take care of their kids.
Absolutely.
But I want to push on this a bit. Why is our brain wired to prefer these quiet background updates over actually confronting the reality of a changing world? Like, why go through all this trouble to hide the objective truth of a changing environment from ourselves?
To understand the why, we really have to look at the biological and energetic constraints of how human cognition is structured. Humans are fundamentally built to perceive continuity, not difference.
Continuity or difference?
Yes, our brains are incredibly energy-intensive organs. They consume about 20% of our body's energy, despite being a fraction of our weight.
Wow, right.
Processing discrete, abrupt changes, analyzing every new piece of data as a completely novel event, that requires a massive amount of computational power.
It's exhausting.
It is.
Yes.
We simply don't have the biological battery life for it. So we experience the world as a seamless flow.
We experience the world as a continuous flow. So change isn't actually recognized as change at all. It's just immediately woven into the fabric of what we call normal to save energy.
That's the evolutionary trade-off. Small, discrete changes in reality are instantly absorbed. We don't recognize them as distinct new events. Our brains instantly integrate them as mere extensions of the exact same thing we were looking at a moment ago.
That's wild.
And the reflective humanism texts map this out beautifully, using what they call the inner operating system model.
Okay, how does that work?
They describe human consciousness as having different functional layers. Layer 2 is what they term the default loop.
The default loop.
This is where our automatic everyday reactions live. It is designed entirely to maintain cognitive stability. It is a strictly linear system. It wants cause to predictably follow effect.
Okay, but the real world isn't like that.
Exactly. The external world moves in nonlinear gradients. It is messy, unpredictable, chaotic, and just constantly shifting.
So you have this rigid linear system inside your head desperately trying to make sense of a nonlinear, chaotic world outside. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for constant, exhausting friction.
It creates immense friction. When our linear, stability-seeking internal OS rubs against the nonlinear, unpredictable external world, it generates something the texts call transparent pain.
Transparent pain. That's a really fascinating phrase. What does that actually feel like? Because it doesn't sound like, a headache or a physical ache.
Right, it's not physical.
Is it that vague, unexplainable exhaustion you feel at the end of a Tuesday when nothing particularly bad happened, but you just feel completely drained?
That is a brilliant way to describe it. It's not acute physical suffering. It's a subtle, invisible cognitive strain. It's the background processor running hot.
Right.
It is the exhaustion of your internal system working overtime, completely behind the scenes, to force a non-linear, messy reality into a linear, stable, comforting narrative so you can keep functioning.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If our brain is an operating system and it's trying to avoid this transparent pain, Are we basically just smoothing out the graphics of reality so our daily lives don't lag?
Smoothing out the graphics.
Yeah, like a video game console that drops a few frames of rendering just to keep the player's character moving forward through the level.
Mm.
Do we just ignore the friction, literally not render the changing details, just to keep the game running?
I'd take that even further, actually. We aren't just dropping frames. We are actively rendering filler content to bridge the gaps.
Oh, wow.
We trade objective accuracy for subjective stability. If we didn't smooth out those graphics, if we truly perceived every tiny shift in our relationships, our environment, and our societal structures in real time, the sheer volume of external data would completely overwhelm the inner OS.
We just crash.
We would be in a constant paralyzing state of cognitive collision.
Okay, I follow the survival logic.
Yeah.
But wait, hold on.
Yeah.
If we are constantly dropping frames, rendering filler, and smoothing over the graphics of reality, what happens to the objective facts of what we just experienced? Like, how does our memory handle the discarded truth? Because surely we store the real, raw data somewhere in our heads.
You might assume that if you believe memory functions like a hard drive storing unalterable video files, but it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No. And this is where the cognitive mechanisms of N73 become incredibly profound and, frankly, a little unsettling. Memory is not a fixed record. It is not a secure archive of objective facts. Through processes of adaptation, habituation, and constant past reinterpretation, memory is reconstructed every single time you access it.
Wait, memory isn't fixed, is it? Are you saying I don't actually remember my childhood or what happened last week accurately?
Not exactly accurately, no.
That my memories are basically just live hallucinations designed to make me feel stable today? I mean, that sounds a bit extreme. I know what I saw.
It sounds extreme until you look at how the neuroscience aligns with this philosophy. It's reconstructed every time. When you recall an event, you aren't pulling a dusty file from a cabinet. You are actively rebuilding that event using the emotional and cognitive materials you have available right now.
Right now.
Yes, we are not recording external changes to objectively play them back later. We are actively rewriting the past and the present moment, desperately trying to maintain our own cognitive consistency.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. If I remember a terrible breakup from 5 years ago, but today I'm happily married and feel like that breakup led me to where I am, I'm literally altering the neural pathway of the memory to make it fit a narrative of progress.
Precisely. If the present changes, the memory of the past is subtly, invisibly altered, so that the present feels like a logical, continuous outcome of what came before. We hide the seams of our own lives from ourselves.
So reality itself is continuously reinterpreted every time I try to remember it. The reality isn't some objective thing sitting out there. It's just my own mental editing bay trying to keep the story straight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of reflective humanism, that is the core argument.
Wow.
The texts propose that human consciousness isn't an existence. It isn't a solid, tangible object sitting inside your skull. Rather, it is a field of generation. It is an interference pattern created by the act of your mind constantly observing and adjusting to the world.
An interference pattern, like ripples in a pond intersecting with each other. The water isn't a solid thing. The pattern only exists because energy is moving through it.
That's a great visualization. And the mind manages this energy using a mechanism the texts call recursion.
Recursion.
Basically, this means the brain is constantly referencing its own information processing. It's like holding a microphone up to a speaker. There's a continuous feedback loop of the brain analyzing its own analysis.
Right.
This recursion creates what the framework calls spare capacity. Think of spare capacity as a cognitive buffer, a mental white space, or a shock absorber. As you encounter the nonlinear world, this buffer slowly fills up with the friction, that transparent vein we talked about, of the changes you've been trying to smooth over.
So I have a buffer that's soaking up all the weird, messy details of reality that I'm pretending not to notice.
Yes.
But what happens when that buffer is completely full? Because I can't just keep absorbing invisible changes forever, can I? Eventually, the shock absorber bottoms out.
It absolutely does. When that spare capacity buffer finally reaches its absolute limit, it triggers what reflective humanism calls a phase jump.
A phase jump.
This is a purely nonlinear shift. It's the exact moment the old, comfortable, continuous narrative snaps and an entirely new meaning or a completely new understanding of reality is born.
Oh, wow. It's that sudden, staggering realization you have when you look at an old photograph and realize, oh, everything is different now. Or when you suddenly realize a friendship has been over for months, but you only just noticed it today. The buffer filled up.
Yes. The illusions of continuity can no longer stretch to cover the gap. You experience a phase jump.
That is wild. We buffer the friction until we literally can't hold it anymore, and then boom, a phase jump forces a massive update.
Exactly.
But if on an individual level we were just walking interference patterns, rewriting our own memories to avoid cognitive lag,
Yeah.
how does this scale up?
Ah, the macro level.
Yeah, because it isn't just individuals who change. Institutions change, laws change, cultures shift. Does society have a buffer too?
Yeah, this applies to society as well. And the mechanics at the macro level are remarkably similar. Institutional and social structural changes happen through a collective process. The N73 framework calls quiet deformation.
Quiet deformations.
Just as an individual brain drops frames to maintain personal stability, humanity as a collective also perceives and demands continuity. We require a stable, predictable social narrative to function together as a civilization. Therefore, the deepest, most radical societal transformations happen entirely in the background.
That's why change feels sudden only after it's complete.
Precisely.
Think about digital privacy. Like 10 years ago, the idea of voluntarily putting a constantly listening microphone in your kitchen would have sounded like a dystopian sci-fi nightmare.
Oh, people would have protested in the streets.
Exactly. But today, you just yell at a plastic cylinder to set a timer for your pasta. There was no single day we took a vote and surrendered our privacy. It was a quiet deformation.
That is the perfect real-world application of this theory. We don't see the ethical baselines, the laws, or the social norms shifting day by day because the collective inner OS of society is smoothing out the societal graphic.
It just becomes normal.
It just slowly becomes how things are. Reflective humanism describes this collective historical process through the concept of spiral interference.
Spiral interference. How does a spiral fit into this idea of society quietly deforming over time?
Think about how interference, that interaction between human perception and a changing external world, it doesn't just happen once and stop. It repeats across generations, across centuries.
Okay.
When that interference repeats, it forms a spiral. It's important to note, it's not a flat circle. We aren't just repeating the exact same history over and over like a broken record. It's a spiral motion.
A spiral.
Imagine walking up a spiral staircase. You might look at the exact same wall you looked at a minute ago, but you are one floor higher. The same type of phenomenon reappears, say, a debate about free speech or a technological revolution. But it happens at a slightly different phase, slightly higher up or further along the curve of human development.
So it's not a loop, it's an evolution. Every time we hit the same issue, we have a new context.
Right. Every recurrence, every turn of the spiral brings a new layer of meaning. That is how scientific knowledge, human understanding, and social structures evolve together. We revisit the same fundamental human questions and the same social frictions, but from a new vantage point on the spiral.
Right.
But here is the trick. Because we are tiny individuals living inside that massive spiral, moving along its gradual curve, we can't see the shape of it. To us, it just feels like we're walking in a straight line.
So what does this all mean for us? If society is just a giant spiral of quiet deformation, that totally explains why sweeping historical changes, like the Industrial Revolution or the dawn of the internet or the shift to remote work, why they only feel obvious after they are totally complete and in the history books.
Exactly.
While you're living through the dawn of the internet, you don't feel like a historical figure. You're just annoyed your dial connection is slow, and you're just going to work.
Yeah, you're just living your Tuesday.
But if it's all invisible, how do we actually wake up and notice the spiral we are in? Like, can we ever step back and see the curve of the staircase?
To notice the spiral, to actually perceive the curve of our own reality while we're on it, we have to look very closely at the boundaries of our perception. We have to train ourselves to pay attention to those rare, uncomfortable moments when the illusion of continuity breaks.
You mean those moments when the mental buffer fills up? When the graphic stops smoothing over and the system hangs for a second?
Yes.
If we can't notice change in the flow of everyday life,
Yes.
when do we actually become aware of it?
This raises an important question. If reality is constantly overwritten, and if our own memories are continuously reinterpreted specifically to hide the seams of change, perhaps we only become aware of true change in very brief, emerging moments.
The moments of transparent pain.
Exactly. Maybe only certain moments emerge from the noise. Those brief moments of stark discomfort, that subtle, unignorable friction when our internal operating system simply cannot process the external gradient anymore.
When the continuity shatters.
When the continuity shatters and we are forced into a phase jump.
It's almost as if the pain, the friction, the disorientation is the only truthfully objective thing we ever experience.
Yeah.
It's the only time we aren't just coasting on a deconstructed memory or a smoothed-out narrative.
The reflective humanism texts conclude with a profoundly deep, almost quiet concept to address this exact realization. They map out what they call the 3 states of interference, which is essentially a guide to how we should relate to this shifting reality once we understand the mechanics.
Okay.
It begins with the first state, which they call love. But I need to be clear, this is not love as a romantic feeling or affection. They define love as the absolute 0 point, the origin. It is the raw recognition of the void, the pure absence of observation, right before our minds start interfering and building a narrative.
The 0 point. So what does that feel like to a human being? Is it like that brief, incredibly disorienting split second when you wake up in a strange hotel room and for just a heartbeat you have absolutely no idea where you are, who you are, or what year it is? Just pure existence without the burden of trying to make sense of it yet.
That is a perfect grounded example. It's that fleeting, narrative-free void. And from that 0 point, the second state emerges, gratitude. But again, we have to strip away our conventional definition.
It's not about saying thank you.
No, this is not gratitude as an emotion of thankfulness or a feeling of gaining something positive. In this philosophical framework, gratitude is described simply as an afterglow. It is a quiet nod, a vector. It is the simple, profound acknowledgement that interference with the world occurred at all.
Like hearing the echo of a bell long after it was struck.
Beautifully put. It's the realization that we touched the world and the chaotic world touched us, even if our inner OS couldn't fully comprehend the change.
And the third state is the spiral itself, the ongoing continuity that we have to return to because we have to keep living.
Yes. The ongoing, ever-turning generation of time and meaning.
If those rare moments of phase jumps, if that friction, that transparent pain where the continuity shatters,
Yes.
if those moments are what actually define our reality.
What are we really calling reality?